this end when the final girl kills the main bad guy and the credits roll.
Welcome to the Final Girl Podcast. This is the podcast where we discuss and analyze your favorite horror movies. My name is Ryan Turner, and with me today I have the lovely Roger Harper. How you doing, sir?
Listen, I'm back, and it's always great to be back on the Final
Always
Girl
great
Podcast.
to have you here. Always
Give
good
me an
times.
excuse to watch a horror movie.
I mean,
as if I needed one anyways.
I was going to say, do you really need an excuse to watch horror movies?
Never.
You're not Jason, so you don't need an excuse to watch them. Jason, however, needs excuses to watch horror movies because he's a little bitch. He's terrified to watch them.
You're not wrong about that. He definitely is. He's quite the pussy when it comes to the horrors.
He does not like them, and I'm glad that this show has kind of brought him to the light of horror movies.
I agree totally.
Yeah, I don't think I've made him watch anything too terrifying. He's
I mean,
definitely
The Ring has its moments, but you know,
The Ring had its moments for sure. But again, too, upon watching that as an adult, now I don't know if he ever watched it as a kid, but watching it as an adult, it didn't have the same terror that it did when I was a kid.
I can think of very few movies that like truly have scared me.
Exactly.
To be honest, so
I will say the movie we're talking about today, it still holds up. I remember watching this.
Yes.
This was the first time I'd seen this movie in years.
right.
Usually when we cover movies on this podcast, I have watched them like recently, and then I'll watch them again to refresh myself for them. This is literally one of the first ones I can remember that I have not watched since I was a kid.
So I haven't seen the movie itself recently just because I've had a very busy week. However, I did pretty recently, like within the last month, listen to a podcast that talked a lot about the true Amityville story, which I've got some talking points we'll get into after we discuss the film, because it's definitely it's some shit. I mean,
it's definitely really scary to think this movie was based on true events. Like, this stuff actually happened.
Yes.
It's just like one of the Conjuring movies. Honestly, I really truly felt like they should have, when they did the Conjuring series. I know I think in Conjuring 2 they talked about Amityville a little bit.
right, because I may be wrong here, but I do feel like they what are their names? What are those guys' names in The Conjuring?
The Warrens?
The Warrens, yeah. I'm pretty sure they did go to the Amityville home.
Yeah. And that's where I'm kind of like torn, because I'm like, I kind of wish they had done a full movie based out of Amityville. I know we've already had this movie and then a reboot and other sequels of the Amityville Horror.
Right.
By the way, guys, if you don't already know, we're talking about Amityville Horror. I don't think I ever said that. But now you know. But there was, a little bit of it there, and there's a lot of movies that have been made about it. So part of me is like, I kind of wish they had made a Conjuring version of Amityville Horror, because I wanted to see what James Wan could have done.
I agree, and actually,
this
they were
movie.
some of the first investigators that were at the home after
Right.
The whole thing had happened.
But then at the same time, too, I also understand it's like, we've kind of beat this movie to death already. We've got the original movie that we're going to talk about tonight from 1979. We've got the remake from, 2005, I think, which surprised
somewhere around there.
Did you know that Ryan Reynolds stars in that movie?
Yes, and I'll tell you, he looked damn good with that beard.
America's national treasure right there. I didn't realize he was in that film because I've never seen the remake.
You've not seen the remake?
I've not, no.
It's not bad. It's not bad at all. It's not the original by any means, but like,
right.
if we're talking if we're ranking Ryan Reynolds on the scale of like
If we're
Green
ranking Ryan
Lantern to Deadpool, it's definitely way higher than Green Lantern.
I feel like there isn't a Ryan Reynolds movie out there that isn't higher than Green Lantern.
You're not wrong. I can't think of any.
Oh, that movie is just something. So, but yeah, like I said, I'm not seeing the remake, but I have seen the original, so I watched it again today. And honestly, there's some special effects in it that are not the best, because it was the 70s.
It was 1979 when the film came out, so it's understandable.
But truth be told, I think this movie holds up. It's still like, it didn't have the same effect on me as it did as a kid. I obviously have been very desensitized to horror films since I've grown up, and watched so many of them. But it definitely, like, I felt just like gross the entire time I was watching it.
Yeah.
It's just very eerie. The atmosphere in this film is fantastic. I think the actors do a great job with the film. I keep wanting to say Josh Brolin, but I know it's not Josh Brolin. It's James Brolin is in this film, and he does a great job as George Lutz. So, honestly, I think it's great. Like I said, there was a couple scenes in it that I remember from watching this as a kid, and I'll talk about them as we get to them. But like, I remember just being terrified of this scene.
Right.
But we'll get to that later on. So,
right. Which. And, even though it's not Josh Brolin, that is his dad. So, close
exactly.
enough.
Yeah. It's pretty much the same thing, but I kept...
Might as well be.
The entire time I was watching this, I was like... I kept wanting to say Josh Brolin, and I was like, no, it's James Brolin.
Mr. Barbara Streisand.
Exactly. So, like I said, guys, today we were talking about the Amityville Horror, the original 1979 version. Also, just so everyone's aware, we're recording remotely once again. However... we're trying to do video in a remote location. So, if you're wanting to watch this on YouTube, in your hallway office, exactly.
Yeah.
If you're wanting to watch on YouTube, I'm hoping that this works out so I can post it on YouTube. Once again, I know I have not posted the old episodes on YouTube that we did record in the studio, but I'm going to...
Including the last episode I was on.
Including the last episode you were on, exactly. I'm pretty sure, actually, the last episode you were on, which was the Blair Witch Project,
yep.
I'm pretty sure that episode was the last one, or not the last one, but the last one we recorded that I did not release on schedule. Gotcha. All the others before that we had released, except unless it was Willy's Wonderland. I think Willy's Wonderland was the one before that we didn't release.
I still need to listen to that episode, but I also want to watch that movie first, so
yeah,
it's fine.
But regardless, I've got Willy's Wonderland. I know I didn't put on YouTube. I've got Blair Witch Project, and I think one more that we recorded in studio that is not on YouTube. I'm trying to get those out. School started back up for me, so I'm back at work again. So trying to get those videos edited and put up is, time consuming and difficult. Right. This one shouldn't be that hard. I just gotta put, the overlays and stuff on there and kind of throw it up. I'm kind of... If you guys follow Wasted Local Talent, which is one of our sister podcasts on 13 Palm Trees, Daniel, the host of that right now, is doing our Wasted Fantasy Football podcast on there. And he is doing remote recording videos. And I'm kind of going to take inspiration of his overlay to make this video.
It works pretty well,
Right. So I've got Roger's video recording. I've got my video recording. If you're watching this on video, you already know this, so I don't know why I'm explaining it. But just in case this doesn't happen, I'm letting you know. I'm going to try to get this up. So if you're listening to this on Friday on the audio podcast, my goal will be have the video up on Saturday. So be on the lookout for that on the YouTube channel, the Final Girl channel. So go check that out and see if it got put up or not. If it didn't, go ahead and flame me in the comments for,
Don't literally shoot a flamethrower at him. Just flame him.
Yeah, hop in the Discord and yell at me. I know Mitch will. 100% Mitch is going to listen to this and be like, Ryan, where the hell's the video? Michael also will, just because it's Michael.
That's why you should use that as inspiration to make sure the video goes up.
Exactly.
I need Michael. Video.
I need that, intensity from Mitch and Michael to be like, where the fuck's the video, Ryan?
I mean, I would do this for gurus, but let's be honest, I am not tech savvy enough to pull that off. So...
It's a little bit of a pain to do the recording because I honestly, right now, if you can see my desktop, I've got like 3 or 4 different programs open to do all the recording that I'm doing.
Right. With me, I'm only using Discord and Audacity, so...
Yeah. I am lucky enough, though, to have a PC that I've built that's good enough to run stuff like this. I also have 2 monitors, so I can have you up on one and everything else up on the other, so I can make sure everything's still going okay.
I get my own monitor.
Huh? So
I get my own monitor. Nice.
Yeah, you got your own monitor. I've got your face on one, and it's actually on my bigger monitor, so it's kind of unsettling to see that. I
always knew I was special to you.
Exactly. So, all right, guys. So let's go ahead and just talk about Amityville. I've rambled on long enough. So, spoiler effect and warning. I almost just said it. Oh my god. Spoiler warning in effect as of right now, guys. We're going to cover this movie in its entirety and talk about it. Breaking down everything that's involved with this movie. So if you've not seen it, go ahead and pause this podcast. Come on back whenever you watch it. I could only find this on Amazon to rent. I could not find it anywhere for free, like Hulu, Netflix, or anything like that. But I do think this is worthwhile if you've never seen this movie to go ahead and watch the film. because I truly think that without... This is one of those quintessential films that without this movie, we wouldn't have things like The Conjuring. We wouldn't have things like Insidious.
It was the first true, like, haunted house movie.
Yeah.
Especially, like, as far as true stories are concerned.
And this came out before The Exorcist, right? Because The Exorcist was in the 80s. So, like, this was even... Right? Let me check that.
Was it in the 80s?
Let me double check that, because it might have been the 70s. You're right. It was 1973, so no, this was way after The Exorcist.
Okay,
I was wrong. Then. My bad.
Well, I was too, so it's fine.
Do you want to talk about a film, though, that I've never seen ever in my life?
What's
The
that?
Exorcist.
I haven't either. No shame.
I have never watched it. I don't know why.
I love horror movies. I'm not seeing it either.
I need to watch it because I know that right there is a cornerstone of horror. So like I just have never seen it. But one day we'll cover it, and one day I will watch it. So we'll get to it eventually.
Right.
Alrighty. So all that being said, guys, let's talk about Amityville. So
let's do it.
Amityville Horror, 1979. Directed by Stuart Rosenberg, written by Sandor Stern, and stars James Brolin, Margot Kidder, Rod Steiger, and Murray Hamilton. So, got a good cast here. I'm a big fan of Margot Kidder. I think she was great in this film. Even though it's funny because she claims that she hates this movie, like she did not like enjoy the film.
I mean, she needs to own this one. This is a classic horror film.
Absolutely.
It's not unfortunately she has Exorcist, but
right. She should have owned it because unfortunately she did pass away in 2018.
Yeah.
So rest in peace to Margot Kidder. But I was a big fan of hers in this film. Also, too, another little note before we get started here. I love the fact that both her and James Brolin thought the stories of the Lutz family were complete bullshit. They did not believe the events of this happened whatsoever. And so I just think that's a cool little tidbit that the two lead stars of this movie did not believe the actual events of the house.
It is definitely interesting.
Yeah. So...
But I'm sure she believed in Superman.
Right? And that's another thing, too, I had in my notes. She's actually in one of the scenes, she's humming the Superman theme song.
Yeah, I never caught that.
Yeah.
And for those of you who aren't familiar with her, she played Lois Lane in the first three Superman films.
Exactly. So...
Yep.
Alrighty, so we open on a very brutal scene in the Amityville house. November 13th, 1973, Ronald DeFeo Jr. murders his entire family with a shotgun at their home of 112 Ocean Avenue.
If nothing else in this movie is true, that is an absolute true story.
That's 100% a fact. That actually happened. That is on record. You can Google the Amityville murders. So even if the ghost
More
stuff...
on that later.
Exactly. We're going to talk about the real life events here later on. Roger has a bunch of facts about it we're going to talk about. But even if like the ghost stuff is not true, 100% these murders happened.
Yes.
Okay, 6 people were killed within this house on November 13th, 1974 by Ronald DeFeo Jr. With a shotgun. He killed, I believe, his 4 siblings and then his mother and father?
Yes.
Yeah. So, very graphic, real-life murders. Kind of being the inspiration for this film. So we get very kind of close-up graphic shots of this. We don't ever see a lot of the carnage happen during these shots, but we do definitely see them happen, and then we get to see the aftermath of DeFeo getting arrested and the police kind of talking about what the hell happened here. Right. So as the bodies get loaded up, we kind of like fade out, and then we are immediately thrown into 1 year later, where we meet George and Kathy Lutz, who are our protagonists of this film. They have just recently gotten married, and they are beginning to move into the property. They're there with a realtor touring the house, and immediately Kathy loves it, and George is kind of like, you know, this is a good house. It's a good location for us because, you know, they've got a boat dock, and the mooring fees are going up, he said. And also, this is a great steal at $80,000 for this house.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know the currency like differences between 1979 and today, but even in today's money, I feel like $80,000 for that house is a steal. So
I'm gonna actually look it up.
Yeah, look up and see what the inflation is on that, because there's one point where she says this house is no, he says it's worth $120,000. But like if you think about it modern day, that house would be worth easy like $500,000 if not more.
I'm sure.
So, but either way, the couple loves the house and they end up buying it, and so they move in with their 3 children. Who, mind you, they are 3 kids from Kathy's prior marriage. They are not George's kids. So we have Greg, Matt, and Amy.
Yes.
Did you find the prices?
Yes, it will be equal to about $406,000 today.
Okay,
now,
so like I said, almost
with the
$500,000.
circumstances to the house, I don't know that it necessarily would have gone up that much. Mind you, pre-movie.
Exactly.
I'm sure pre-movie it would have shot up even more, but I'll get back to that later.
I mean, first of all, who's gonna want to live in that house? Unless you're, I mean, yeah, you're right. People will want to live in that house, but like, I don't know. I don't know that I could purchase a house that I knew stuff like that happened in.
Right.
That's just me though, and I don't know. This is one of those things where it's like, you know, I watch a lot of horror movies, but I also definitely do believe in spirits and like things like that. And even if it's not spirits, I definitely believe that, and this is something I want to talk about later on, I believe houses have like a soul. And I think if enough bad things happen in that house, that soul becomes tainted, and then regardless if ghosts and demons and all that stuff are real, it's just a negative space that's going to cause you to have harm and bad luck and stuff like that. So that's just something that I've always thought about, and I think that's kind of like a driving point of this film here, that regardless of ghosts and demons being real, I definitely believe this house is kind of tainted with like a darkness that surrounds it. So but regardless, we have the Lutz family, like I said, George, Kathy, Matt, Amy, and Greg. They all move in, and they're just a very happy family. Kathy is a very devout Catholic, whereas George doesn't really have much of a religion, but he kind of shifts to Catholicism to kind of, you know, be with Kathy and make her happy.
Yep.
So after they get moved in, they immediately call a priest, Father Delaney, to come bless the house. And he shows up, and they're all outside playing, and he goes into the house. And this scene, while I was watching it today, it kind of like confused me because, first of all, we never get the phone call to Father Delaney to come bless the house. It's just kind of known. So it just like, it shows up, he just shows up, and you're just like, why are you in their house? What are you doing? But he goes upstairs, and he begins his process of blessing the house, and immediately shit goes wrong.
Oh, for sure.
This movie, it literally doesn't even hold back. This is 15 minutes into the film, and it's already just like we're in for a long ride here. Yeah. So he takes out his Bible. He takes out all of his stuff to bless the house, and he hears some buzzing going on. And he looks over, and there's a few flies on the window, which is weird because it's December, so there shouldn't be flies at this time of year. And as he's preparing his things, more and more flies begin to show up until eventually they're swarming him and just covering him in flies. And it's just a very kind of suffocating, like claustrophobic
disturbing kind of scene. Yeah,
exactly, very unnerving kind of scene. I did learn though that in order to get the flies to cover Rob Steiger in this scene, they did put honey all over his face.
That'll do it.
And so the flies flock to him naturally.
It's a good thing it was a fly infestation and not bears.
And not bears, yeah. So as he's beginning to do this ritual, and the flies begin to swarm him, he begins to feel very ill. He starts sweating a lot, and just becomes violently ill within this house. And all of a sudden, the door swings open, and we hear a voice say, "Get out." And he's kind of like looking around, and then it just screams at him, "Get out." And so obviously he does what he's told by the voice in the house, and he leaves and he goes to his car and he drives off without even saying anything to the Lutz family. So they don't even know he showed up. But he did, and they're trying to like kind of, figure out why he never showed up. Eventually, later on in the movie, there's a phone call where Kathy learns that he did go to the house, but the other father in the church just assumes maybe there was a mix-up and that's why she never saw or heard from him.
Right.
So obviously things kind of like begin going wrong, and again, I'm going to apologize right now, guys, for those of you guys who are avid fans of this movie. This is the first time I've seen it in years. I literally just watched it, but trying to piece together all the events up until the end, it's just there's a lot of stuff that happens, and so if I get the order wrong of things, I apologize. Because I usually have like the Wikipedia article pulled up. I do have that here to try to keep things in order, but even that article is not in order. Like literally the first paragraph of that article.
Yeah, it's not very well.
No, it's not very well written.
Organized. Yeah.
It gives the entirety of Delaney's character arc all the way to the end of his character arc in the first paragraph, which doesn't happen until the very end of the movie. So, but all things begin happening. It's very noticeable to Kathy that George is becoming irritated by this house. Like he's looking sickly. Things are not going well. He wakes up several times at 3:15 a.m. The first night he wakes up at 3:15 a.m. He kind of walks around the house. And goes out to the boat shed where he goes to have a smoke, and then a cat jumps over the window, and that scene scared the shit out of me. I'm not gonna lie, the cat. I forgot all about that scene, and the jump scare. Exactly, the jump scare got me for sure. But as the days begin to progress, Kathy lets George know that her aunt is coming to visit. Her aunt, who is a nun, I believe her name was Helena. She'll be coming by the house that afternoon. This kind of irritates George, and it's kind of one of those moments that we get to where we start seeing this irritation really start to seep in. And I don't know if it's just the fact that he doesn't like Helena, or if it's the fact that she is a nun, and he's already kind of under the impression of the house at this point.
More on that later, too.
Exactly. One thing I did want to mention, before I get too far ahead of myself, one scene I didn't mention was one of the first nights they're there is a very intimate scene between Kathy and George. Kathy's in her room doing like yoga or something in front of the mirror, and George comes up and they have this little talk before ultimately having sex. And I wanted to mention that this sex scene, probably on the surface level, to a lot of people is just like, oh, this is just a way to add sex and nudity into the movie. But in reality, I think this scene's very important to mention, because without this scene, we wouldn't know who the real George was.
Right. Because
there's lines that he says within this scene talking about how much he loves her, how much he loves the kids and everything, even though they're not his kids. And I think it's a very important scene to have in the movie, because without it, when he starts becoming very irritated and like things begin to go down later on, I don't think you would have that kind of connection with him, so to say. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So I'm just trying to piece things together here, because some people might think on the surface level that scene is unnecessary, just sex and nudity or whatever. But if you pay attention to what they're saying to each other, I think it's absolutely like imperative to have that scene there, because it gives another layer to George's character before he begins to spiral out of control. You get to know who George truly is before he actually begins to plummet. So like I said, things begin to happen. As he's walking around the house at night, he starts noticing weird things going on. Like one night he puts Amy into bed, and he closes the window, and then he walks back in a little bit later on. The window's open again, and the doll that he gave to Amy before she went to bed is sitting in the chair beside her bed. I hate that scene because it's a Raggedy Ann doll, and it's a very terrifying, looking doll.
Yeah, for those of you who have seen the Annabelle films, the real Annabelle is a Raggedy Ann doll.
Exactly. And I personally just hate Raggedy Ann dolls to begin with. I think they're terrifying looking dolls. So I'm not
Do you also feel that way about the Andy doll, or is it just Raggedy Ann?
I also don't like Raggedy Andy either.
Okay.
So that's just a personal thing. So I just think they're even before I knew that the Annabelle doll was a Raggedy Ann doll, I didn't like those dolls.
Right.
So like I said, Kathy's aunt is coming over. She's a nun. And so she shows up at the house, and when she shows up, George is out cutting wood. this is a thing that becomes a very common occurrence for him because he says the house is so cold. It's always so cold he can't even stand it. So he's constantly making a fire and cutting wood. And this, like I said, this you'll see him do this throughout the entirety of the film. He's just cut a bunch of wood. It honestly reminded me, this obviously came out way before, but this reminded me a lot of the father in The Witch. Because he's constantly cutting wood to like kind of atone for his sins almost. Even though George hasn't done anything yet, we kind of get this sense that George has done something, but we just don't know what.
Right.
And I'll remind me of that because I'll talk about that here later on in the movie because it's kind of important later on. But Kathy's aunt comes over. She like hugs the kids, gives them kisses and everything. And almost immediately, the second she walks in the house, she begins to feel sick as well, just like Father Delaney did when he came into the house. And so she kind of like stumbles over to the kitchen. She drops a plant that she brought for them. And it just, Kathy comes down and starts talking to her. And almost immediately, she's just like, I have to leave. I can't be here any longer. I'm sick. I have to go. I'm sorry. I apologize. And she flees. Like, she runs out of the house and goes. And as she's driving off down the road, just like with Father Delaney earlier, she vomits. So it's very much, you get this feeling as you're watching this movie, there's very much an idea that there's, well, we know there's something not right with the house, but there's obviously something that plagues anyone of the Christian faith within this household.
Especially those who are, you know...
like higher up in the...
It's the nuns and the priesthood and
right, because we don't really get that from Kathy. And honestly, that's one of the things I wanted to ask you. We know that Kathy is a devout Catholic. She has George hang up a crucifix in their living room and everything. Right. Do you think that she truly is all that devout based on the events that happen? Because you see how when the priest and the nun come in, they immediately become sick. When Kathy's there, though... Or do you think it's just because they have devoted their lives to God? Is that why they became?
So I think it's more the latter there. I think it's because they are actually working members of the church, like full time. However, as I was going to mention later too, Kathy may not necessarily have been 100% on board with Christianity, because it is definitely rumored that George Lutz was actually he would dabble in the occult.
Oh, okay. I did not know that, actually.
Yes.
So, interesting. Another thing I wanted to point out, too, I don't know much about the Catholic faith. I'm not going to sit here and claim that I do.
Yeah, same here.
I did not grow up Catholic, so I don't really know anything about the Catholic faith or all the tenements of the Catholic faith. But we do know that Kathy has had kids from a previous marriage. Yes. We don't know how that marriage ended.
Right,
was she a widow?
Is strongly frowned upon.
Or was it divorce?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I'm kind of hinting at here. If it was a divorce, then...
typically frowned upon in the Catholic faith.
Right. And so therefore, would the demon have really thought of her as a God-fearing person?
You're right. It'd be more of a sinning kind of thing.
Exactly.
Which, it's not uncommon. However, it's frowned upon.
Right. So that's just the question I wanted to pose there. I don't know. It never once talks about her ex.
No, he's not mentioned in any.
And then I also don't know. I didn't do any research on the real Lutz family to see what happened to her husband before George. But regardless, so after, like I said, after her aunt leaves, she throws up, and then we kind of skip forward a couple days. Keep in mind, those of you guys who don't know, this entire film takes place over 28 days. The Lutz family stayed inside the Amityville house for just 28 days, and on the 20th night, they fled and never came back.
Yes.
So the entire time we're watching the film, it kind of counts down the days. It's like, day 1, day 8, day 9, all this stuff like that, like kind of important dates that happened within the house. So a couple of days later, we have Kathy's brother's wedding. He's over at the house. He's dressed up in his tux and everything. And he's counting money on the table. And he calls Kathy and he's like, Kathy, can you double check this for me, please? Because I'm like panicking because we have to pay the caterer $1,500 in cash. He wants it in cash. He does not want a check. He doesn't want any other form of payment. He wants cash only. And so Kathy's like, stop worrying, you're fine. You counted 1,000,000 times, it's fine. So her brother puts it in his pocket, and George walks in to talk to them about everything, about what's going to be happening tonight, because they're going over to his wedding. They're going to be taking Matt and Greg. I keep forgetting the kids' names. They're going to be taking Matt and Greg and leaving Amy at home because Amy is giving symptoms of, like, flu.
Well, to be fair, those weren't the actual children's names.
No, I'm sure they weren't. Yeah,
yeah, they did change the children's names. George and Kathy, however, those were their names.
Okay, yeah. So they're leaving Amy at home. Mind you, another thing too I didn't mention. That's why I feel bad for this episode, because I'm trying my best to remember the order of events that things are happening here, and I'm leaving gaps out. So if you guys have not seen this movie, I implore you go watch the movie before you listen to this episode, because I'm gonna miss a lot of things. So I'm sorry about that. Because this truly is like a straightforward movie, but at the same time, there's a lot of things that happen in between that are just kind of like filler for the most part. So I forgot to mention, speaking of Amy, we have her friend, her invisible friend Jody, who we're introduced to earlier on. And so Jody is very important because Jody very much is a malevolent spirit within the house.
Yes.
No one else sees or hears anything from Jody except for Amy. But it's very important to mention Jody because she definitely comes into play a lot throughout this film.
Yes.
So, like I said, the Lutz family is going to Kathy's brother's wedding, and they are leaving Amy behind with a babysitter, because she's exhibiting flu-like symptoms. She's just like her father, or not her father, she's just like George. George is also becoming sick, but he's going to go along with the wedding regardless. So as they go to leave, Kathy's brother notices that his money has gone missing. He doesn't know where it is. They check his pockets. They check his pants pockets, his coat pockets. They look around the couch where it was, and it's just completely gone. And so, obviously, Kathy's brother begins to panic because he needs this money to pay for the wedding, but he doesn't have it now. So George says, hey, don't worry. Listen, I'll write a check for the guy. And so her brother's like, well, he doesn't want to take a check. And George is like, we'll make him take a check. I'll talk to him.
Right.
Okay. So they go to the wedding, and that night, while Amy is at home with her babysitter, we get the scene that terrified me as a child. And this is the closet scene.
That's definitely the scariest scene in the movie.
Yeah. I don't know why this scene was so scary to me as a kid, but this scene definitely was terrifying to me. Right. I think it's mostly just because it's such a claustrophobic scene.
Yes.
And I'm a very claustrophobic person. It's the same reason. It's got the same kind of like vibe and feel that what is that show called? I literally just had it. Not Goosebumps. It was the Nickelodeon scary show.
Oh, Are You Afraid of the Dark?
Are You Afraid of the Dark? Thank you. I literally had it and then I lost it. It's
what
the same. Show. It's the same feel as an episode from Are You Afraid of the Dark, where these kids trap and lock another kid in a house, and she ends up dying within that house. That episode terrified me as well. So
some dark shit, Nickelodeon.
I know, right? Dude, 90s Nickelodeon didn't fuck around. Okay.
It did not.
It was
That's why
dark.
It was best Nickelodeon.
Absolutely, yeah. So while Amy's being babysat, the babysitter, what was her name? Jacqueline?
I believe.
I think it was Jacqueline. She goes to get Amy some pajamas out of the closet, and as she walks into the closet, the door slams behind her, and locks her in the closet. Even though there's no lock on the door, she is now trapped within this closet.
Right.
So she begins banging on the door, pleading to be let out, and we see the shot of Amy just sitting in bed with the rocking chair beside her, just rocking back and forth. And it's truly just kind of like a terrifying shot, because we know this kid can easily go open the door, but this Jody figure will not let her go open it.
Yeah, which I think really the scariest part of that is the fact that you definitely understand while you're watching. Like, that rocking chair is moving.
Absolutely.
So yeah. It's like you just said. It's clearly that it's not that she doesn't want to go open it and help the babysitter. It's that Jody says no. Jody
says no. What Jody says goes.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we get this scene of the babysitter banging on the door, pleading to be let out. And as she's banging, we see like bloody handprints started to appear on the door because she's banging and like scratching at it so hard that her hands have started to bleed. And so we kind of cut back to the wedding now at this point. George obviously is not doing well. He does not want to be here any longer. We have this confrontation between him and the caterer. And basically he says, you know what, I'm going to give you a check regardless. I don't care if you don't want one. It's either you get a check or you get nothing. So he ends up writing him a check, and then basically immediately after that, they decide they're going to go home. They can't stay through the reception because George is not feeling good anymore. So they need to go home. So when they arrive home, they end up finding Jacqueline inside the closet, and the door opens obviously very easily once the parents come back home. And we get this scene where George and Kathy are like asking, why the hell did you not open up the door? You knew she was in there. Why, you heard her screaming. Why'd you not open it? And Amy just looks up and says, Jody wouldn't let me. Mm-hmm. And it's chilling. I hate it. It's so creepy. Yeah. Little kids in horror movies are the creepiest thing.
They always are, for real.
And so, yeah, she's just like, Jody wouldn't let me. And I love this whole, like, part here where George he's obviously very irritated. He's been irritated the entire time. They've been in this house. But this is kind of like a big breaking point, I think, for George, because he walks away, leaving Amy, the babysitter, and Kathy in the room, and just shouts at Kathy, these kids of yours need some goddamn discipline. And I feel like that's like one of the biggest slaps in the face he could have done to Kathy,
yeah, for sure.
rather than actually slapping her in the face, which he does later. Because to say to your wife that something like this about her kids that are not your kids, I feel is just a huge slap in the face. And
bitch, get the fuck out.
Exactly, yeah. Now, I obviously understand that when it comes to parenting and things like that, like step parents and stuff, they obviously should have the right to discipline children, especially if they're like married to the mother or father of the kids. But I feel like that was just extremely rude, and we obviously know it's the house working through him. It's not actually him saying it. But just to say something like that, to tear her down, is just one of the most intense moments, I feel like, in their like kind of quarrel that they have with one another. So after that happens, George walks out, and Kathy kind of takes Jackie to kind of get her cleaned up and sends her home on her way. So let me see here. So a couple more days go by, and again, I apologize. This is, like I said, these events are just all kind of like strewn together because, like I said, this movie grabs a hold of you at 15 minutes in, and just things happen throughout the entire film. There's no like setting things up and then all of a sudden it goes wrong. It's very much just like, we're here, we're doing this, let's go. So along the way, like I said, Kathy calls for Father Delaney, only to find that he's extremely sick. Earlier in the film, after Father Delaney had gotten home, he tried to call Kathy to warn her about the events that are going on in her house, and his hand began to blister. The phone was all staticky, she couldn't get through to him, he couldn't get through to her, and so his hand began to blister, and he dropped the phone and hung up on it. And that becomes kind of a plot throughout the rest of the film with his character, to where every time she calls him or he calls her, it's just static, and he always like kind of fears the telephone every time it rings. We get another scene with Father Delaney where he's talking to other priests in the area, like his superiors, or I'm not sure if they're his superiors or who they are, but they have more of a connection, I guess, with like the Vatican than he does. And so he's begging them for like anything to help this family. He's like, there's definitely something wrong within this house. Anything you can give me to help them would be great. And his superiors brush him off completely. They're just like, this is nothing but hysteria. We've seen this before. You have given us no proof here. And Delaney's like, listen, the man who murdered his family the year prior, he heard voices. He testified that he heard voices in his head, told him to murder his family. When I was there, I heard these same voices. And they're just like, that tells us nothing. That can always be speculation. we can't help you here. And this obviously infuriates Delaney because he wants to protect his family. He knows something wrong is within this house, but he can't do anything about it because his superiors will not help him out. And so this is kind of like his decline here because he wants to do something about it, but they will not let him do anything about it. And so ultimately, he's left with no resolve here, and they walk away basically saying, when is the last time you saw your family? And he says, I don't know. And they say, well, maybe it's time for a vacation. And basically kind of force him off of this. Yeah, get out of here. This job's getting to your head. You need to go. You need to take a break. Okay. So back at the house, we have this scene where Amy is having like a tea party with Jody, and the boys, her brothers, are playing with like a fishing pole with a spider on it up in the upstairs room. And so while they're kind of like teasing her, George's partner in his business comes over to the house, and once again George is just cutting wood, and his partner Jeff, his wife Carolyn, will not get out of the car. She does not want to go in this house. She says there's bad juju within this house. She does not want to even go near it. So Jeff goes over by himself and talks to George, who he immediately says, you look like shit. He's like, you look terrible. Yeah.
Pretty upfront about it.
Exactly. He's like, no one's seen you for days. He's like, what have you been doing? And it's basically just, George is just like, I've been chopping wood. So Jeff tells him, hey, listen, we need you to sign these checks. The people were supposed to get paid yesterday, and you did not sign these checks, so we need you to go ahead and do this for us now. Also, like, come back to the business because it's starting to fall apart without you here. So he tries to kind of convince him to come back, but it doesn't seem to work. There's not really a lot going on within George until he mentions the fact that he brought George a part for his boat. I think it was a light or something for his boat.
Yeah. Sounds about right.
Yeah. He says he brought this, and so George kind of perks up at that, and they go walk off to take the boat back, or to take the light to the boat, and George turns, and he has an axe in his hand because he was chopping wood and sharpening this axe, and just throws it at this tree. And Jeff just has this visible reaction to it, like there is something not right with my friend. But as they're walking to the boat, we hear someone start screaming, because back at the house, what had happened was the boys who were teasing Amy, one of the boys had his hand in the window, and that window slammed shut and crushed his hand. So he starts screaming. George and Jeff run upstairs to try to see what's going on, and they cannot get the window open. Jeff even says it feels like someone nailed the window down, and so they're trying to get it off, and eventually they do. And they take him to the hospital, where it turns out that none of his bones were broken. So it's kind of like this miraculous thing that none of his bones were broken, even though the window completely crushed his hand.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they could not get the window off his hand. But regardless, he's fine. And things kind of carry on from that point. We get a lot of scenes here of the dog, Harry. He's always down in the basement, barking at this wall, scratching this wall, trying to get to something. But we never quite know what it is at this point, at least. And then there's other scenes, too, here where George and Kathy both wake up around 3:15, and they start doing weird things at 3:15. Like, there's one point where Kathy wakes up, she sits up at 3:15 in the morning and screams, he killed the mother, he shot her in the head. And then lays right back down and falls back asleep. There's another night when she wakes up and she goes to check on Amy, and this is when she starts to realize, like, not just George is, off. The entire house is off, because as she checks on Amy, Amy is like, "Oh, you just scared off Jody," because they were sitting in the room singing and playing together. But when Kathy comes in, the rocking chair stops rocking, and Jody escapes out the window, is what Amy says. So Kathy's like, well, let me go check on Jody and make sure she's okay. And so she goes to the window, and we see these two red eyes peering back in through the window.
That's not creepy or anything.
Yeah, not creepy at all. Not creepy whatsoever. So we finally started to get this idea that something is wrong with this house, and Kathy now knows something's wrong. So she tries calling through to Father Delaney once again, but there's just static comes on the other end. She can't get through to him, so she knows she has to go to him. She has to go find him. So let's see here. What happens? Like I said, this Wikipedia article is trash when it comes to putting it in order. It's very poor. Yeah, like I'm doing my best to try to remember the order of events here, and it's literally just like, oh, here's everything that happens for one character, here's everything that happens to another character. So I apologize once again for not having this be very chronological about everything. But there is another scene, I guess we'll talk about with Father Delaney here, where he is in his church, and he basically prays to God to save these people who are living in this house. And the statues on the wall begin to like crumble and shake and fall apart as he's praying, crying out to God to save this family. And whenever he finishes, he looks up and notices that he has gone blind. He cannot see anymore. And so this is kind of the breaking point of Father Delaney. This is kind of the point where I believe he truly does lose like his faith at this point. I don't think he has like a mental breakdown, and he doesn't want to really be a priest anymore at this point. He kind of has lost his way. And we get that later on in the film when Kathy goes looking for Father Delaney, and she finds what's his name? Father Boland. She finds Father Boland, and she's looking for Delaney, and she's like, where is he at? And Father Boland says, well, he's gone on vacation.
Vacation.
Yeah, vacation. And he can't really help her any more than that. And so she kind of leaves distraught from this and goes off on her way. And we come to find out later in this same scene that Father Boland had gone to go see Father Delaney, who is now sitting in like this park area. And he's very much just like apathetic to everything. He's had his mental break, and he's just kind of, he's done. He's shot. There's nothing left to this man anymore. He's completely cracked and just empty as a man. This house has broken him. This demon who's inside this house has broken him. Another thing I haven't mentioned that we can talk about now is the sergeant who was following this family around. Because one night, while everyone's sleeping at 3:15, of course, the door to the front of the house gets blown open. And it gets blown open from the inside out. And so they call the cops because they think they had a break-in, and the sergeant goes through and walks through and finds, there's nothing missing, there's no broken windows, no forced entry, except for the door, which was busted open from the inside out. Which, obviously, if it was someone breaking into the house, they wouldn't have busted it from the inside out.
Definitely not.
Right, so he kind of tells them, we're gonna put you on a tighter watch, and I'll be watching you. And we kind of see the sergeant watching them throughout the rest of the film. He even follows Father Boland, to where Delaney's at and questions him about what's going on with him. And Boland just kind of says, there's no story here. You just need to leave, basically. So later on, a couple nights later, George goes out to the bar to meet Jeff, because Jeff has said, listen, we need to talk about the business. It's starting to fall apart. We have to have a meeting. And when he gets to this bar, the bartender spills the drinks on the counter because he's scared of Jeff. Not because Jeff looks like hell, but because Jeff, like I said earlier, there's something wrong with him. The something wrong with him is the fact that he looks just like, what's his name? Ronald DeFeo. He looks just like the man who killed his family a year prior.
He really did, actually. Look a lot like him.
I think they did honestly, the casting for this was great because he looks like him, James Brolin does in real life. So he's like, you're like the spitting image of the man. And funny enough, he sat right where you're sitting the night he killed his family. So this kind of is like the darker meaning within George's character. I don't know if it's like fate that he wound up there, or if the house picked him because he looked like him. If they picked George Lutz because he looked like Ronald DeFeo. I don't know what the kind of inclination is here, because we never really get much resolution to the fact that George looks like DeFeo.
We don't.
It's just kind of like a coincidental thing.
Right, and that's something you kind of got to, like, if you're listening, like, well, obviously, if you're listening or you're watching, doesn't matter each one, Google photos of Ronald DeFeo Jr. and of George Lutz, and you'll definitely see the
similarities. Yeah. So, but regardless, Jeff and George have this kind of conversation about their business after this happens. It comes to blows. George punches Jeff in the face because he gets so irritated, but then immediately snaps back into it and is just like, I don't know what came over me. I apologize for what I just did there. And Jeff is like, you need to get out of that house. Something about that house is eating you from the inside out. So you need to get out of there. Take Kathy out for a nice dinner. We'll babysit the kids, me and Carolyn. And you guys just kind of get out for even a few hours, because something is not right about being within that house. And so after they begin talking, they actually meet up with Jeff's wife, Carolyn, who is very sensitive to, like, the paranormal. And she's kind of, like, going through this book, and she finds the origins of this house and finds that this house was built by a man who used to do satanic rituals on the land. And it also, too, was built on the land of the... and I don't want to butcher this, but I feel like I'm going to. Is it the Shinnecock?
I believe so.
Native Americans. Yeah, it was a burial ground.
We know this.
Yeah. So, it was built upon a Native American burial ground, which I don't know what it is about the 70s and 80s when it comes to paranormal films like this, but they love burial grounds.
They do. They absolutely do.
Like, all I can think, like, Poltergeist, 100%, like, yeah. But yeah, she explains that the house is built by a man named John Ketchum, who was a satanic worshiper. And so the house is just, it's cursed, basically, is what she tells him. Yeah. And so they drive back to the house to kind of, like, get George washed up and so he can take Kathy out for a nice night. And when they get back there, Carolyn is drawn into the house, which is weird for Jeff because he's like, weren't you afraid of the house before? And she's like, there's so much energy. I have to go into this house now. And so she goes into the house and immediately goes downstairs, where we find Harry, the dog, once again scratching at the wall. He's been scratching at it so much that his paws have begun to bleed. And so Jeff kind of takes the dog to clean him up, and while he does this, Carolyn grabs a pickaxe and begins to beat down the wall. And Jeff is obviously just like, what the hell are you doing? Why are you doing this? And tries to stop her. George even runs downstairs and is like, why are you tearing up my house? But then Carolyn says there's something behind this wall, and George stops her and kind of goes over to the wall and feels it, and he's like, she's right. There's something back here. I'm not sure what it is, but there's something back here. So then he tears down the wall to where they find a small room with red walls behind the brick wall that was in the basement. By this point, Kathy has joined them, so it's George, Kathy, Carolyn, and Jeff all downstairs in the room. And as they're looking into this room that's painted red and has like this red glow to it, Carolyn begins to just shriek in terror. She like has this look of horror come across her face, and begins to shout that this is the passage to hell. But what's weird about this, though, is when she says that, it's not in her voice. It is in Father Delaney's voice. And we kind of see him, we cut back to him. This is before he went blind, mind you. We kind of cut back to him, and he's like, got his head in his hands shaking, and then the phone rings, and he picks it up, and there's no one there. So, we have this whole situation where now we have this ominous room in the basement that clearly is not, a good place, so to say. Yeah. So we get, again, a lot more incidents happening at 3:15, and eventually all of this kind of just culminates into the final night. I know I've skipped over a lot of things probably because this is a 2-hour movie and I just have condensed it down super, to the basics here.
45 minutes, yep.
Exactly, yeah. But again, it's one, again, like I said, there's a lot that happens, but a lot of it, again, can be just filler. I honestly, too, that's another thing I have about this, another problem I have with this movie, is I do think it was stretched out a little bit too much. There were parts where it started to drag for me. I think this could have been an hour and a half film. We did not need a 2-hour film for this movie. But also, too, another thing before we get to the final night, on that final night, Kathy is out at a library, I think is where she's at, and she's looking at old newspaper clippings of the murders that happened within the house, and she herself finds that George looks just like Ronald DeFeo. And so she freaks out and heads home. Mind you, the night before, she'd had a dream about George killing her family with an axe. And so as she heads home, we see George outside sharpening an axe, and the storm begins to rage outside of the Amityville house. And so everything begins to culminate here in this final night. We have the title card that says the final night or the last night. And this is where shit actually hits the fan and begins to go down. So Kathy gets home, and when she runs into the house, I love the fact that when she runs in, she leaves the door open and it slams shut behind her, but she doesn't even notice because she's so hell-bent on trying to find her kids and get them.
Yep.
And so she runs into the house, and she is able to get her kids, and she puts them all upstairs in the upstairs bathroom and locks them in there. Just as George comes into the house, and as he's walking in the upstairs windows, he sees Jody, and Jody is manifested as a demonic, like, pig, basically, form. And so George comes in, completely looking like Jack from The Shining.
Oh God, he does, yeah.
Yeah, he's deranged. He's got an axe. He's all disheveled. So he comes in ready to kill everybody. Yeah, here's Johnny. There's 100% that here's Johnny's scene in this film when he starts cutting down the door with an axe. But he comes in and he starts calling out for Amy because Amy is going to be the first one he murders before he kills everybody else. So he starts calling out for her, and he walks his way up to the attic where he finds the bathroom door locked. Excuse me. And he hears the kids crying behind the door, so he knows they're in there. So he begins to chop down the door with an axe, and that's the here's Johnny scene that we get in this film. But as he's doing this, Kathy runs over and grabs a hold of him and kind of tackles him down, and he almost like overpowers her. But eventually he realizes that it's her, and so he stops. And this kind of like breaks the spell that's over top of him. Because, like I said, up until this point, he's been gradually decaying and like falling, like going down, down, down. There was a scene earlier, like I said, here he had slapped her because she was wanting to leave and he did not want to leave the house. So he slapped her and she went off, and he kept putting more fire, like logs on the fire. But now it seems that something here has broken, and he is finally back to who he truly was before they entered this house for the first time. And so he's disrupted, and quickly they get all of the kids, and they begin to leave the house. And as they begin to leave the house, we notice the walls and the stairs are oozing blood. And it's just
parts or the fictional BS.
Exactly. This is where the movie starts becoming the movie, because I don't believe that the walls and the stairs oozed blood as they left the house. But as they're leaving the house, they're able to get out after a few incidences with the door shutting and everything like that. We see in the basement where Harry still is, the floor of the red room beginning to expand and bust open. So, like, all of the demons inside the house have now come out and are full-flowing here. The portal to hell has been opened, essentially. So, George and Kathy get the kids out to the car. They get them in the car, and they begin to drive off when Amy shouts that she wants Harry. They have left the dog behind. And so, George, being now who he once was, decides he's going to go back into the house and get the dog. So he goes back into the house, where once again he's trapped inside, and he goes into the basement to get Harry, and as he's walking down the stairs, he collapses through the stairs and falls into the red room, and falls through the floor into this pit of just black goo. Which this goo we've seen before. I didn't mention it, but there was a scene where the toilets began to overflow with this black goo. Apparently they fixed it because it wasn't an issue the rest of the film. but there was a scene where they had all this black goo kind of flowing over into everything. And so this is the same black goo that he falls into in the floor. And eventually he's able to get up out of there with Harry's help, because Harry eventually, at first Harry bites him because he believes that he is one of the demons that's coming out of the house. Yep. But George convinces the dog that it's not, it actually is him. And so he gets Harry to help him out of the pit, and they go off out into the house once again, where George has to break a window to escape from the house because the door has locked and he cannot get the door open this time around. But regardless, George breaks the window, jumps out with the dog, runs back to the car, and the movie ends with them driving off, and just a title card that says, George and Kathleen Lutz and their family never reclaimed their house or their personal belongings. Today they live in another state. And that is how the film ends.
It is. That's
the
film.
Yeah, I don't know. I apologize once again for that terrible retelling of that movie. I don't know why. I literally just watched it, and I feel like I can't remember the order of events that things happened in. I don't know if it's just because I was paying attention, but I don't know if I was just stressed because we're doing this and it's just like I got the filming and everything going on, or like what the deal is, or the fact that Wikipedia sucks. Because usually It's all pretty much straightforward with the Wikipedia article and everything. But all in all, that is the end of the movie. And yes, I believe this is the first ever Final Girl podcast episode we've done where every single person survives.
Yeah.
There was not one death in this movie.
The Final Girls.
The Final Girls, exactly, yeah. So, before we wrap things up here, and before we start getting into our other topics and everything that we're going to talk about, let's talk about the real life Amity horror. Okay, because Roger, this is what you wanted to talk about. You wanted to bring this to the table.
I wanted to bring the
real life aspects of things. So I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'm going to let you kind of lead the discussion here on the real events that happened with this movie. Okay,
so as you mentioned previously, this really all started off November 13th, 1974, when Ronald DeFeo Jr. murdered his parents, his two brothers, and his two sisters. Of course, those brothers and sisters, John Matthew was age 9, Mark Gregory was age 12, Allison was 13, Dawn was 18, and then his parents, Louise and Ronald, were 42 and 43, respectively. So Ronald was actually convicted on 6 counts of second-degree murder for all this.
Right.
And he eventually did die in prison.
Actually, just recently. It was like March 21?
Yeah. I wasn't very long ago at all.
Yeah. It was March of this year.
So, in real life, we had mentioned the previous husband of Kathy Lutz. They did divorce.
Okay.
And that information came from her son, Christopher. Which is one of their actual children's names.
Okay, yeah.
Yes. Their other children were Daniel Lutz and Missy was the little girl's name. So, Jody DeFeo, there was obviously not a Jody DeFeo that was killed, and the imaginary friend of who was actually Missy, which in the film she was Amy.
Right.
She did have the imaginary friend named Jody, but it wasn't the ghost of one of the children that was killed. Okay. It was just an imaginary friend.
Just an imaginary friend, yeah.
Correct. Which may possibly have been related in a way to the murders, but it's hard to actually tell.
Right.
The babysitter scene, that was completely fabricated. That was not a real life individual, nor was that particular event. In fact, that was completely redone in the 2005 remake to give that character more sex appeal.
Okay, nice.
Yeah, so it was later used as a drawing point for sex appeal.
Okay.
Here's some facts about the house. The original address of the home was 112 Ocean Avenue, but that address has now changed. It is now 108 Ocean Avenue, and that's to throw people off from having a lot of people there just poking around and doing this and that.
I also read too, real quick about the house. They replaced the eye windows with rectangular windows to try to get rid of that evil look of the house.
There are square rectangular windows in the home now.
Yeah.
Yes, correct. Speaking of the home, of course, we mentioned the Lutzes purchased that home for $88,000. The house recently, it was in 2017. The house was sold for $605,000.
Wow. Okay.
So that's more than what the inflation obviously would have been for today. But of course, you got to keep in mind this is the Amityville house.
Right. Exactly.
Of course, none of the filming, of course, took place in the house or near the house.
No, it was all on soundstage probably and everything.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, I was a little parched.
No, you're good.
So some more things about the real life haunting. There were several creepy things that definitely happened in the house as far as paranormal activity is concerned.
Super normal.
Yeah, super normal.
Yeah.
So George Lutz, obviously, I did mention that there was a history of him. He had a history with the occult. So he was definitely into that kind of thing.
Which is interesting.
Yes.
Because I guess that they don't talk about that in the movie at all, but it's more related, like more hinted at the fact that he was like an atheist or whatever, because Jeff does say you changed your whole like religion for this girl.
Yes.
So whatever that religion might have been, so I guess if it was more of like an occult kind of religion, he changed it to Catholicism for her. So
the 3:15 a.m. Wake-ups, he was actually waking up every morning, which was also around the same time that Ron DeFeo committed the 6 murders in the home. Right,
which is the relation to that in the movie as well.
Correct, yes. Which we've already mentioned as well. He looks just like him. Google some pictures. I mean, it's very similar.
If you're watching on YouTube, they're on the screen right now.
There you go. See, there's Ron DeFeo and George Lutz. You can look at them right now. Other paranormal activity that was experienced in the home. There was a garage door that would open and close continuously. There was an invisible spirit that would knock down a knife in the kitchen. Supposedly a red-eyed creature staring down at George and Daniel, who would be outside. They would see the creature in the window,
which is in the film.
Which was a pig-like, which actually was a pig-like creature. Correct.
Okay, so that's why. Okay, I wasn't sure if they went with that because there's the whole idea that like the devil looks like a goat / pig, whatever you want to. So that now I know that's why they went with that in the movie.
And there were also events where Daniel and Christopher would be levitating in their beds.
Okay.
Which that's scary as fuck.
That's not creepy at all. No. not one
not
bit.
Even slightly, right? After telling the story, they actually had George and Kathy Lutz take a lie detector test, and they passed the lie detector test. As far as talking about the hauntings and the events that
happened,
that they experienced in the home. A lot of people believe that they made up the story for money, but that's obviously there's been a lot of things that definitely make it look that they didn't. Their son Daniel, he lives in New York still, and he says that the house ruined his life, and he has nightmares to this day from the experiences he had in the house.
I mean, I don't blame him. I would as well.
Yeah, the other 2 children do not talk about the house publicly. They stay out of the limelight. They don't want to discuss the house. They don't like to discuss the house.
Yeah.
They leave it be. And then, of course, there is the most damning evidence that's probably in existence as far as photographical proof of the existence of ghosts. Ryan, put that picture up there.
There you go.
So right there, you see a picture of what looks like a boy with glowing eyes standing behind the banister at the bottom of the staircase. And attached to that photo should also be a picture of the youngest of the DeFeo children, John Matthew. And you will see that they definitely look a lot alike. This picture was taken from an automatic camera setting by Gene Campbell. He set a camera up in that second floor landing, and it would automatically take photos based on like infrared activity. And it captured that photo. There are numerous paranormal investigators that were working in or around that home at the time that have confirmed that there was absolutely no one in that house that would have been a child that could have been in that photo. So...
yeah, it's not terrifying at all to look at this picture.
No. I mean, I might have nightmares tonight from this picture.
If you're familiar with the game Phasmophobia, this picture is in that game. It's in the van whenever you get all your supplies and everything on the one of the walls. And yeah, it's a creepy photo. Like, it truly is. And to think the fact that, first of all, it looks similar to the youngest child of the DeFeo murders, but it also to have an idea that there was just no one in that house when this picture was taken, no kids at least near the area, and they clearly have there's a child that is a child in this image.
It is also worth noting as well, the photographer who captured that photo worked with Ed and Lorraine Warren frequently.
Okay.
So it was somebody who worked with them a lot that captured that photo, probably working with them at that scene, I'm sure. Yeah, that's pretty much what I have for it. Like I said, that photo, that's, as far as like photographic proof that goes surreal, that's like the closest thing we have, in my opinion, to prove that.
I don't even know what to say about it, because it's truly a terrifying image, and you're right, I do believe it is very solid proof. If you are someone who even remotely believes in spirits, this is proof. And if you don't believe in spirits and you're looking at this right now and you're like, this is a bunch of bullshit, I would love to hear your theories. I'm sure there's a ton of them out there who don't believe this picture's real, like this is just fabricated, or like what the deal is, because truthfully, I can see that point. We were not there. We will never know if this picture was fabricated. It's just like, all like the Nessie and Bigfoot pictures out there. Right. We will never know. So
there is a 2012 documentary that came out.
Okay.
Where Daniel Lutz himself is in the documentary, and he speaks about the going-ons of the house. Also worth noting, too, of course, we saw in the movie, George Lutz had that obsession with splitting logs. One of the complaints that the family living in the house was often going on about is it was always freezing cold in the house, and they could not get it warmed up to a decent temperature.
Right, and George in the film kept complaining about that. That's why he had the fire going 24/7.
Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the haunting.
Roger, this has nothing to do with the haunting whatsoever, but I have a question for you because I know you'll appreciate it.
Yes.
Do you think that the Lutz family has any relations to Will Lutz?
I mean, Will Lutz is kind of a scumbag.
All right, Roger. So before we wrap up our conversation of everything, I thank you for the actual historical information of this house.
Yes.
I gotta ask you, do you draw any analytical connections with this film?
I gotta be honest, I really don't too much. It's just such a straightforward film. Like, it presents what it is.
It is.
And gets to all of its points. There's not really any underlying questions like, well, what if? Or, it's very straightforward.
No, I agree completely, and I hate saying that because this show is based around trying to draw analytical discoveries from these movies. However, like I said before, not every movie is going to have that. We have covered other demonic ghost films on this show before, like Hereditary, and that does have thematic elements to it. But this one, it's literally a straight up ghost movie that doesn't have much under the surface of it.
Right. Yeah, there's really not much of a discussion. And to rank the
we're talking
girls,
about ghosts. We're talking about ghosts and everything. I just heard a thud behind me on my window, so I just pooped my pants a little bit.
I mean, I just heard sirens outside, so that's not nearly as terrifying as a thud.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I'm sorry for the listeners who love watching the show and listening to the show based on the analytical conclusions we can come up with. But if you've seen this movie and you can think of anything that the filmmakers might have added in to be a thematic element or a motif or whatever, please let me know in the Discord, because I racked my brain trying to think of something to even say. And truly, for this film, I think it's just a ghost movie. I think it's just a possession film. It's just a straightforward haunting film. There's no deeper meaning here. Maybe if anything, you can draw some kind of form of toxic masculinity out of George Lutz's character. I think if you're gonna really reach for straws here, I think you can.
And you really mean in this case, really reaching for straws.
Really reaching for straws. I think you can maybe draw some kind of conclusion that between Robert DeFeo and George Lutz as characters, I don't want to talk about the real life people, but I'm talking about as characters in this film. If you want to draw any kind of conclusion there between the two of them, maybe that's why they're so similar, because they both have that toxic masculinity to them. But
right.
I don't know. That's just me trying to grasp at anything here at this point. So, but yeah, if you guys think of anything, please let me know in the Discord, because I would love to hear your thoughts on the analytical side of this film.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So, with that being said, Roger, we obviously have final girls in this movie.
We do. We have a lot of them.
We have several. Yes. I'm not going to rank the kids, though. I'm also not going to rank Father Delaney or anyone else.
The kids are really just plot devices, to be honest.
Exactly. We're going to stick with just George and Kathy Lutz. So let's start with Kathy, and then we'll go to George. So where on the scale from S to F would you rank Kathy Lutz as a final girl?
So I definitely would rank her higher than George. I want to start off with that for sure, because she's the one that kind of snapped him out of the whole thing. And she is the one in the film that kind of figured everything out that was going on to be able to make the moves necessary to make sure that she's getting the family out alive.
Absolutely.
Now, with that being said, like, she's no Nancy from Nightmare. You know,
no,
she's
this is no S level final girl here.
She's no Laurie Strode. But, you know, as a character, I think she's a strong enough character and is very well acted.
Oh, yeah.
And based on the fact that, she was the voice of reason that kept this from going just to hell. I would say a B.
Honestly, I agree completely. Yeah. Excuse me, I don't have much other reasoning there besides what you said. I think I agree completely. She was very level-headed for the majority of the film. She definitely came through when she needed to at the end to kind of break George out of his spell. She was very rational about a lot of things, even when things were not rational around her. And so I think all in all, she didn't do anything spectacular, but she also didn't really make any super fatal flaws, except for maybe saying, yes, let's move into this house. Like, that was probably the one, like, fatal flaw she made.
But she didn't know.
But it wasn't fatal. She didn't die. So, I'd say a solid B tier for her. So, what do you say about George?
I'm going to go with a D, just simply because obviously George was very easily manipulated in this film, to the fact that, you know, he was on the verge eventually of killing his family. He was definitely influenced by the house, I would say, from pretty much
from the get-go.
A day or two after they moved in. It was from the get-go, really.
Yeah.
And the only reason I would give him a D instead of an F is he saved the dog at the end.
He did go back and save the dog, yes.
He went back to the dog for the kids.
We're all the way at the end of the episode, and we're going to talk about it now. The dog does not die. So if you needed to Google doesthedogdie.com, dog does not die in this movie. Thank God.
Correct.
So, again, I have to agree with you. I think a D is a good level for George because he is the main villain for the majority of the film. Right. Although technically, yes, the villain of the movie is the demon or the ghost, whatever's possessing the house. He still falls under its influence very fast and very quick. He gets into a lot of these urges that he has that are obviously not right, and he ultimately tries to murder his family. Yes, he does snap out of it. He does save the dog at the end, but all that being said, he tries to murder his family. So
he does.
You can't really give him much higher than a D, I don't think, on this one.
Yeah.
So I agree completely.
That was being kind for the dog.
That's being kind for the dog, exactly. Yeah, that's being kind for him rescuing the dog at the end. He went back for the dog. So yeah, I agree with you. I'm gonna put him up a little bit as a higher D than a lower D, because the true George that we see in the beginning and towards the end of the movie after he breaks out the spell, I think George truly is a good person. I don't know, like, movie character George. I don't know much about George Lutz in real life, what he was like, but I do think in movie character version of George Lutz is a good person, so I'm going to put him up at like a higher D. So, all right, well, that brings us to the end of our discussion of the Amityville Horror. Hopefully you guys were able to make it through this mess of an episode. I don't know why I feel like this episode was such a mess, but I just feel like
I thought it was a good episode.
Hopefully you guys thought it was a good episode, and it's just me thinking this episode's a mess. But regardless, thank you guys so much for listening. Roger, thank you so much for being here.
I love being here.
Yeah, go ahead again. Tell people where they can find you on the internet.
So I am the host of the Gurus of Gaming podcast alongside the Gurus of Gaming podcast alongside my friends / co-hosts, Jason Shaver, Alan Bryan, Ryan Turner.
I'm on there sometimes.
Yeah, they make appearances.
We always appreciate guest star appearances.
Yeah, I love when you guest star. I miss back in the day when you were on every episode. I gotta say that.
You know, honestly, I've thought about that. I do miss the old days of Gurus where I was on every episode, but things happen, so...
You'll also soon be able to find me on twitch.tv/coffee and grind. That's coming up here.
I didn't know you were doing that. Okay.
Yep.
Dope. So, alrighty, Roger. Once again, thank you so much for being on, sir. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, anytime.
13 Palm Trees Podcast Productions. I'm doing
way.
my final plug here. What are you talking about? What do you want?
Saying, let me know when you're doing Ghostbusters. I want to be in that episode.
Okay. I don't know if I'll cover Ghostbusters anytime soon.
It wouldn't necessarily make sense because it's not really a horror film, but it's just
got
a
horror
movie.
elements to it, so maybe Ghostbusters I think Ghostbusters might be a better like Patreon exclusive episode.
I don't know. With that.
Do you guys want a Ghostbusters episode? Let me know.
I'm just saying, Ghostbusters is probably my second favorite film of all time. So.
Oh really?
Yeah.
I've not watched the original Ghostbusters movie since high school.
I watch it every couple of years. I'll throw it on and enjoy it.
Yeah. I've never seen the 2016 version or 2014 version?
Not as bad as everybody makes it out to be, but also not that good.
And then they're also coming out with another version, aren't they? Like another remake?
Yeah, it looks really good. It's not really a remake. It's a sequel.
Oh, it's a sequel. Okay.
It's a far distantly set sequel.
Okay.
Yes.
So maybe we'll talk about Ghostbusters when the sequel comes out.
That's coming soon.
Maybe we'll do it. Maybe we'll do it. So
maybe.
All right, guys. 13 Palm Trees Podcast Productions. They bring you shows like this: Gurus of Gaming, Video Game Mythos, D&D Kinda, and also Wasted Local Fantasy Football. So check those out wherever you get your podcasts. If you guys want to know more about the show, you can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/TheFinalGirlPodcast, Instagram at Final Girl Podcast. You can check us out on YouTube at the Final Girl channel. Make sure you put Final Girl channel, not Final Girl Podcast. I changed the name of that for the YouTube channel. If you want to support the show and help make this show a reality, you can do so at patreon.com/TheFinalGirlPodcast. I appreciate each and every one of you guys who does so already. You guys literally rock. I love you. Thank you so much. And then also to join our Discord, talk to us there. We talk about movies all the time in there, and if I want to know y'all's thoughts, like any kind of analytical thoughts, what you think about the movie we're covering, anything. Get in there, talk to us. Roger and I are in there. Michael's in there. Unfortunately, Mitch is in there, and so is Jason. I'm just kidding. I love you, Mitch and Jason. Hop in there, talk to us. It's always a good time. But once again, thank you guys so much for listening. Roger, thank you for being here. And as always, guys, until next time, take it easy.
Look, movies like this end when the final girl kills the main bad guy and the credits roll.